Welcome to the Modern Medicine Movement Podcast with Dr. Thomas Hemingway. Have you ever looked in the mirror and said to yourself, I thought I'd be healthier, in better shape, feel better both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and be further along in my life? If so, come on this journey with my dad as he explores all things health and wellness from a holistic medical perspective, even as a classically trained physician. He'll share integrative strategies to optimize health and inspire you to join the modern medicine movement.
Welcome, and a big aloha, A-L-O-H-A, to all you guys out there listening. Thank you so much for being here. So grateful for you guys. I'm here in Hawaii. It's a beautiful Monday morning, getting this out to you just after the holiday weekend of the 4th of July yesterday. Hope you and yours had an amazing 4th of July with family here in the U.S. You're celebrating our freedoms, and oh man, despite all the chaos and all the gnarly, last couple of months where in a lot of ways I feel like our freedom has been infringed upon, I'm still so grateful to be here, to be able to share this message with you guys, to now be with my family again. There's really so much to be grateful for. The times are weird, the times are rough, they're just kind of crazy, and I don't even really want to get down that road because it's been it's been kind of a trippy time. But to be honest, I think we still have so much to be grateful for. I'm kind of a glass is half full kind of guy, and I try to focus on what I have, what we have, and not what we lack. It's all about our focus, as our friend Tony Robbins always says, what we focus on expands, and we can always focus on either what we have or what we lack, what we can control or what we can't control. And at times like these, I can't think of a more important time to really hone in on and really evaluate our focus. What is it that we focus on? Do we focus on the things that we have, all the gratitude that we can have? Because trust me, I have been reminded of this on almost a daily basis. Things could be, I'm not a fatalistic guy, but they could be a lot worse. And in my line of work as an ER doctor, I see some pretty bad stuff happening and just wacky stuff. And it always reminds me of the gratitude and the respect and the appreciation I have for life and for health and for, all the things we do have, because there's always going to be things we lack, always going to be things not going right, always going to be plenty of things outside of our control, like right now. Things are crazy. My family just got back. They had to do the mandatory, 14-day quarantine, which they all successfully did. And it was a little wacky, literally not leaving home for 14 days. Pretty nutty stuff. It was decided upon by our Hawaii, governor, despite lack of convincing evidence and things like that. But, we did it. We're compliant, and, we're doing fine. And it's just one of those things where I think our focus is so important, and I like to keep the focus on the up and up, on the things that we can affect, on the things that we can change, on the things that we can do, because I believe that really we have so much within our reach, so much within our control. And for me, one of my primary focuses is on health, right? I just think it's so important to get a good grip on our health. And in truth, it is really largely under our control. It's not what happens to you. It's, life can and does, I believe, happen for you. And we have control of so many things, especially over our own bodies. We have control over our health. And with a little bit of knowledge and some pretty simple steps, I hope I can help you all take great efforts to improve your health, because if you don't have health, it's pretty hard to have a whole lot more and enjoy your life if you really, are suffering health-wise. So I want to help you, each and every one of you, help us to to thrive, to not simply survive, to be able to have better health, better wellness overall of our bodies, our mind, our souls, our emotions. And all of these things I think have really been taxed lately, and I want to be able to focus on what we can do, not what we can't control, but what we can do. And I think there's so much, and it just excites me to have this opportunity, and it's really because of you, my listeners, that I do this. And so thank you to each and every one of you for taking the time. I wanted to highlight one of our listeners who wrote some feedback just this past week. I'm so grateful for all you that do this, and literally we've had thousands and thousands, I think 10,000 or more downloads, and it's been awesome. It's been amazing. It's been humbling. And I think we only have like 50 reviews so far on Apple Podcasts. So I know a lot of you guys haven't reviewed yet. It's super easy to do. I promise you, you can do it in less than 60 seconds. Just go to my show, click on the link. If you don't see the 5 stars at the bottom of the feed there, click on the little 3 bars there that has the option to go to show. And then if you scroll down, you should be able to see the 5 stars. If you click on the star farthest to the right, that's the 5-star review. And then there's a little highlighted area right below that with a little notepad and a pencil there that says write a review. Just click on that, type a little something there, give me a little shout out, give me a little love, tell me what you're learning, what you've enjoyed, thoughts you have. I'm so grateful for you guys that do this. It really does not only makes me feel like we're doing something important here, and it just really helps encourage me to keep doing this, because it is something that it takes up a lot of my time, and I'm working full time right now, and lately I've been a little out of whack. I've been working the night shift and literally up all night, nights and nights in a row, and so I'm a little bit off on my time schedule, but I'm looking outside right now. It's beautiful. The sun is out. I'm letting my photoreceptors just absorb that natural light, albeit through the window, and I'm grateful to be sitting here on a beautiful day in Hawaii, and I'm grateful for you guys, my listeners. And so I wanted to shout out to Kim Possible 5, who gave me a 5-star review. Thank you very much. Entitled "At Health and Wellness at My Level." She says, I'm assuming it's a she. She says, "I'm loving this podcast. Thomas breaks it down so well, ! 3 times. I didn't go to medical school, but I'm interested in steps I can take to live a healthier life, and this is pure gold. Thanks for doing this, Thomas! ! Out to the end of the line. Thank you, Kim. That I love your name there, Kim Possible. It's possible. I think all things are possible. I thank you so much for your review. Just grateful for you, Kim. Grateful for all of you guys for listening. Just super, super grateful. This is why I do this. I so much appreciate it. I'll try to highlight one review every week, and so please keep them flowing. It's really simple to do. It really means a lot. Also, if you haven't heard about our new private Facebook group, you can join it for free. It's called Modern Medicine Movement Health and Wellness Group. I pretty much approve universally everybody, as long as they are not saying negative things and being a troll. I pretty much approve everybody. I want you guys to have access to the podcast, to the other things I'll highlight. I try to do a live every other week or two that focuses on some health topic. Often I do them with my wife. It's a lot of fun to have a little banter back and forth. As many of you know, my wife is she's both a nurse, a health enthusiast. She's a sports and wellness and a movement specialist. She's got a bachelor's in kinesiology and health, as well as a bachelor's in nursing. So she's got lots of insight from her background, both as a nurse, as a health coach, and just being in fitness. She's been a certified fitness instructor and personal trainer for over 20 years, certified in all kinds of awesome, fun exercise disciplines. And so we often do a live together, and it's a lot of fun, and I'll try to make those available on the Modern Medicine Movement Health and Wellness Group. You can also reach out to me at Aloha Surf Doc or at Modern Medicine Movement. Shoot me an email. I'm pretty old school. I still do email. Modern Medicine Movement Podcast at gmail.com. And often I get my topics from you guys, what you're interested in. And today my topic, I've been wanting to do this for a long, long time. I've had kind of a healthy discussion with a lot of my friends and family about this topic. I think all of us have some history with this particular topic, which I'm going to both speak of in general terms of breakfast and specifically of breakfast cereals and whether or not they may be healthy or not, and a lot of the very fun facts, interesting history behind breakfast, especially breakfast cereal. I just find it super fascinating. We're going to go through a lot of super fun stuff that I'm sure most of you hadn't heard already. Maybe you had, and if so, kudos. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. I'm super excited to share this with you. We're going to go down a little path in history, and well, why don't we just get down into it? So I think let's just talk in general terms about breakfast. Breakfast is often touted as, quote unquote, the most important meal of the day, and fact or fallacy? Well, I would say it depends, but it sure made good marketing, and those who really coined this term and got it going were none other than the makers and inventors of the most popular and sort of first cereals, breakfast cereals, that came about at the turn of the 20th century, the early 1900s. We really got sort of pre-made, fabricated, industrialized society choosing breakfast cereal to be a good, quote-unquote, healthy option. And it's so funny because, you know, the original two guys that kind of happened upon the, quote-unquote, invention of cereal did so with some pretty interesting motives. And let's even jump back in time. You know, breakfast historically and over the millennia really hasn't been all that common. I mean, if you really go back and you do your homework, you do the history, you know, for thousands and thousands of years, we basically didn't really eat breakfast. In fact, you know, it was considered almost a sin starting in the Middle Age times and things for people to even eat breakfast. It was considered kind of gluttonous. They most often did 2 meals a day. That was the more common. And if we even go way back before that into our hunter-gatherer ancestors, I mean, how could they eat breakfast, right? I mean, it was pretty much impossible. They didn't have any food lying around, because if they did, it probably would have got scavenged upon by the local coyotes or, you know, other predators out there in the middle of the night. They would come and take it away, just like this past weekend. We barbecued with some good friends of ours here in Kauai, and we literally left our meat just on the table, and it was at a table, and it was not like in any kind of random rural spot. It was a table at a fairly commercial swimming pool area in a hotel, and literally within minutes of us just sitting a couple feet away from this sort of serving table, the leftovers of our meat got snatched away by the local feral cats and so on. And so, you know, just as it got snatched away for us in these days, in ancient times, I mean, you couldn't just leave food lying around, and they certainly weren't really eating breakfast because they had to go out and get it, right? They had to go out and hunt whatever they were going to eat. You know, they sort of ate what they killed. They were hunters, they were gatherers, and they didn't just have food sitting around. So literally for thousands and thousands of years, we never really did eat breakfast. And guess what? We were pretty darn healthy back in those days. We didn't die of heart attacks. We didn't have much for dental, you know, cavities. It's very interesting. I was doing a lot of reading on dental and oral health this past week for hopefully a future podcast that was super fascinating. And I may get into some beefs with some of my family members. I got lots of family members who are dentists, and they may not agree with me, but you know what? I just seek for data, seek for truth, and it's not always common, right? Common sense is not common practice, and I found this to be the case in way too many things in life, and eating breakfast is one of them. I think the popularization really of breakfast largely was commercial. It was largely commercial because in our ancestors, they really didn't eat breakfast. In fact, breakfast was considered a meal for the poor and the slaves, and they, you know, often most of the noble folks never even ate breakfast, and then when they started to, it was around noontime, and it was a big fancy breakfast with meats and cheeses and all kinds of stuff. But those that did start eating breakfast, you know, several hundred years ago, was usually the real hard laboring class that had maybe a bowl of porridge before they went out to the fields or something. It wasn't really much of a breakfast anyway. Not like, you know, we may think about when we think of our, you know, quote unquote, all-American breakfast with bacon and eggs and, and potatoes and all these kinds of things. That is the sort of 5-star Grand Slam breakfast that some of us may be familiar with, or, just the American-made, cereal, quote-unquote, healthy option breakfast. And I want to focus a little bit on that, because I just find the history of cereal so fascinating, because when it first sort of came into play, popularized really the turn of the 20th century, early 1900s. It was first discovered in the 1860s or so by a physician by the name of James Caleb Jackson. He was a super religious, conservative vegetarian, actually. It was 1863 to be exact. He ran sort of, in those days they called it a medical sanitarium, which was kind of like a medical health spa by today's terms. This was in New York. He created sort of, partly by accident, partly by design, he was looking for a healthier option, quote unquote, for a morning meal. And he basically used graham flour dough that was dried and sort of just let to get really hard. And then they broke it into pieces, into kind of crumbs, into smaller flakes and shapes. And it was so hard. Literally, this stuff was like little rocks. In fact, people had described it back in those days as like literally eating grain rocks. And it was so hard to chew and really to be able to masticate and all that they literally had to soak it overnight, often in milk or cream or what have you, to make it soft enough to be able to eat the next morning. Literally soaked this stuff overnight. So that was late 1800s. He called it granula, Granula, not granola like we're familiar with, but that was actually somebody who stole his idea. And I'll talk about him in a sec, but granula, he called it, and it was from these graham dough flakes that was super hard, and they literally had to soak it overnight. A later physician also, in I believe the same religious group as James Caleb Jackson, who was also pretty into vegetarianism, and they actually believed in these times. This is so interesting. I looked up as many things as I could just to corroborate this history, because it was a little bit far-fetched, if you've never heard it before. And I kind of had heard it alluded to, but I thought it was just kind of a hoax and was just kind of, fictional. But indeed, these guys believed that sort of a heavyweight, rich breakfast, or any meal for that matter, rich foods, meats, of course, because they were vegetarian, right? So meats were sort of evil, but anything rich or heavy or spicy, they thought these sort of rich foods led to increased sexual desires and masturbation and things like that. And they were pretty like anti, having heightened sexual desires, anti-masturbation, these kinds of things. And so they were looking for a way to control, if you will, people so that they would have less sexual desires. Like literally, that's why they came up with the idea of super bland, real boring, kind of tasteless breakfast. Like that to them was super important to try to decrease sexual desires in their religious group or what have you. They felt it was related to eating rich foods. And so they went out to basically make a really boring, not very tasty breakfast food, which they did and called it, granula, which was James Caleb Jackson. And then John Harvey Kellogg, another physician of that sect, he, got familiar with Dr. Jackson's initial recipe. He stole it. He started calling it granula as well. The guy had no shame. He just copied the name, called it the same thing, made his own little variety of it. And then he was like, oh, crap, I better change the name a little bit, or I might get chased away or sued or what have you by Dr. Jackson. And so he changed it to, super original, granola, the word that we use today with an O, Granola. Took the U out, replaced it with an O, and there you go, his own creation. And he and his brother, William, they set out to make breakfast cereals, and this they were doing in the late 1800s, early 1900s, had a couple of different recipes. Dr. Kellogg did it more as a way to hopefully, help people to reduce their sexual desires, also kind of help them be on a more of a vegetarian plan. This was going to be part of a breakfast that did not include meat. And so they used it in their sanitariums, and for him, it was all about getting people to adopt his sort of way of being, his lifestyle. He wasn't really into the commercialization of it, but his brother Will, man, he was an astute entrepreneur, and he wanted to market this thing. And there were a couple of beefs that occurred between John Kellogg, Dr. Kellogg, and his brother William Kellogg, and ultimately they parted. William bought out the name of Kellogg Company or whatnot, and he started going crazy with the mass production of breakfast cereal. And he started doing things that his brother was not going to be super happy with, because his brother was into all the bland and nothing rich, nothing sweet. And then his brother Will, he knew the American people, and he knew how, basically hard to resist foods with sugars and things were. So what did he do? He started adding sugar. He manufactured the original and very popular cornflakes, Kellogg's cornflakes, and it all came about in the early 1900s from this thing initially to control sexual desires and to promote a vegetarian sort of lifestyle and what they determined to be more quote-unquote healthy. And then it just went south, right? All these extra processed cereals with lots and lots of sugar. And it wasn't quite exactly what John Harvey Kellogg had in mind, but that's the direction it went. From their first recipe, which they called granola, to their most popular cornflakes of the time, which got mass-produced and literally made them worth millions and millions of dollars. And it's so interesting how this all came about. Nobody was really eating cereal in the early 1900s, and then by 1910, there were literally hundreds of companies making cereal, many of which were located in the same area as Dr. Kellogg in Michigan, where he had his health spa or his sanitarium there. And one of the guys that had a competing idea was actually a former patient of Dr. Kellogg's, who was a surgeon, and he was, you'll maybe recognize his name, C.W. Post. Yes, this is the same Post of Post cereals, which became a major, major competitor of Kellogg's, and he developed grape nuts, which I think many of us are familiar with sort of a similar initial thought process that these were quote-unquote healthy foods. Of course, we know that grape nuts has nothing to do with grapes. It has nothing to do with nuts. But hey, it sounded like a cool name, I guess. And so he was trying to compete with William Kellogg, and he was the first one, I believe, to offer coupons for his cereals. They both began early on in this same sort of era, 1910s or so. They even started to throw in guess what? The little surprise in the box, those fun toys that I know in my childhood, we were always looking for that stuff in the cereal box, and whichever of my siblings got it, like he or she was sort of the luckiest person alive that day. What a marketing strategy, right? This was 100+ years ago, more than 100 years ago. So the Kellogg brothers, and principally, once the doctor kind of left it to his brother after their disagreements and things. John Harvey kind of was out of the picture, and William was more the guy running the Kellogg business, William Keith Kellogg. And they developed the cornflakes, as I mentioned. They became super popular. We were mass marketing them. They had the first in-box prize, I should say, and they were just selling this stuff like crazy. And it was through their marketing, actually, that they developed this very famous quote based, of course, on no science, no data, no randomized control trials, nothing, but it was spoken by medical people. In fact, it was initially, at least according to the sources I read, the dietitian that worked at Dr. Kellogg's sanitarium by the name of Miss Cooper. She was a dietitian, and she initially said breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And she coined that. Dr. Kellogg supported it. And, of course, it made for some pretty dang good marketing. And even to this day, I think many of us hear our own doctors maybe repeating this. And the science is pretty mixed and super interesting. We're going to get into that a little bit later. Right now, we're just having a sort of a fun drive down memory lane. I even know many of your grandparents, certainly my own, often reiterated this notion about breakfast being the most important meal of the day. And my grandparents grew up in the 1910s and 1920s, and so they were around during this time where breakfast cereals just were sort of exploding in popularity. In the 1910s, the Quaker Oats company was getting competitive, and their sort of claim to fame, because they had Quaker Oats even before Kellogg and Jackson. They've had Quaker Oats for quite some time, but they were the ones that invented the famous cereals that were, quote unquote, shot out of a gun. And they called these the eighth wonder of the world. The Quaker Oats company making, breakfast cereals such as puffed rice, puffed wheat, and they got this technology where they were able to put it under pressure, and they called it, quote unquote, food shot from guns. So super exciting of the times. This is the first thing like it in the 1910s. In the 1920s, one of our most revered cereals came to be completely by accident. This was the so-called Breakfast of Champions. You guessed it. Wheaties was developed because it was actually a health clinician that was making a wheat bran mixture. It wasn't exactly meant to be a cereal, but spilled it onto a hot stove, and they turned into flakes, and it just really looked like a good idea to use these for a breakfast cereal, and pour a little milk in there, have some Wheaties, and not long after that, they started to look for athletes to be able to promote their cereals. It was a full baseball team, I think in the 1930s, out of Minnesota that was promoting them. It wasn't long after that that athletes such as Lou Gehrig, were promoting Wheaties, and of course all of our most revered and favorite sports idols of all times have at one time or another been on that Wheaties box, right? Everybody from Michael Jordan to Larry Bird. These are sort of my time basketball heroes, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson. Of course, the famed Olympians have graced the box. When I was a kid, I think in high school, Mary Lou Retton was on the box, and she was, of course, the famous American gymnast. We've had all kinds of folks over the years appear on that famous Wheaties box, and it's sort of, I think, for a lot of sports people out there, it's a pretty important achievement to get your picture there on the Wheaties box, right? You're one of the greatest athletes of all times. People, like I said, Michael Jordan, also Tiger Woods. In every discipline, that's sort of the greatest of all times, I think, has graced the Wheaties box at one time or another. And this was literally a food that was once again discovered kind of by accident in the 1920s. So super, 100 years ago. There's also a super interesting history behind Chex, the corn Chex, wheat Chex, rice Chex by the Ralston Purina Company. Most of us have heard of that company as more of a dog feed or a pet feed company, but of course they have the very famous Chex that they came up with. And it's actually, I don't even have time to get into it, but it came about from another one of these kind of really religious groups that had some very interesting philosophies and things. And you can look it up at Ralston. Each of those letters signified something, and it's pretty interesting history behind, their whole development of Chex. It's something that I think if most of us knew the full history, we probably would never eat Chex again, because it's not sort of glorifying or gratifying of people, thinking they're better than other people, or certain groups better than other groups. I don't promote or support that in any way. I used to be a big Chex fan just by the cereal taste. I thought it was healthy, but I literally haven't eaten it in years, and I didn't even know about the weird history behind this Ralston group. But if you have a moment and you're curious, Google it. Super, super interesting. But yes, they've been around as well from the 1930s, and of course they've been bought out by other companies over the years. Cheerios, one of our, I think, most favorite, most well recognized as a society, has been around since the 1940s. It was initially named Cheery Oats, not O's, but Oats. And of course, the Quaker Oat people were pretty upset, and they quickly renamed it. And it has become, over the years, literally the best selling food in America, cereal food, I should say, probably worldwide as well, the most recognized, most popular. And it's had, of course, several different varieties. I think the most famous of which of all times has been the Honey Nut Cheerios, introduced a little later down the road in 1979, being the most popular version ever. But this came about, the Cheery Oats, or what we know as Cheerios, became popular in the 1940s and literally have been a $1 billion industry. Like, holy moly, billions of dollars are spent on cereals. And you probably knew that, but it's just amazing to really think about how this all plays out and what the origins were. And they thought that it was a super healthy way to start the day. And, we'll get more into that part of things and the science and whether or not breakfast is the most healthy meal. We'll get into that a little bit later. But in the 1950s, after World War II, the overall cereal industry was getting pretty interesting. They had lots of companies out there. I think the main selling point was starting to become sugary cereals. Way back in the day, like I said, Dr. Kellogg did not want sugar in his recipe. His brother did because he knew it would sell. So they started using it, against the wishes of course, Dr. Kellogg. But guess what? It sold like crazy. And after the World War II period, pretty much all the main cereal companies were manufacturing tons of cereal with sugar in it. They had famous cartoon characters. The one that jogs my memory is Mighty Mouse. When I was a kid, I would see that. I think it was something like, "Here I come to save the day," something like that. And there were little commercials about certain breakfast cereals being healthy and having just the right amount of sugar for energy, and all these weird fallacies that they were promoting. But you know what? We, especially us children, we were super, gullible and influenced easily by this marketing. And literally billions of dollars have been spent over the years on marketing to children for many things, but breakfast cereals has been one of them. You guys are familiar with Frosted Flakes and its sort of main pinchman, Mr. Tony the Tiger, and, the kangaroo, the toucan of Fruit Loops. So super interesting. There have been others like the Captain, the Captain of Captain Crunch. Like, who is this Captain guy? Or Cap-In, I guess. Not really Captain, but I remember that fella had a uniform on, right? But it was Cap-In Crunch. Of course, from the famous Quaker product that promoted Captain Crunch cereal. And then they added the berries there. I mean, so many interesting different foods, breakfast cereals, I should say, have come about in the last 50 to 70 years. Really, I think the heyday was probably when I was growing up in the 70s, where all of the multicolored, fruit-flavored, sort of character-driven cereals came about. Things like Count Chocula, Frankenberry, the Fruity Pebbles, the Flintstones, popularized this, of course, Cocoa Pebbles. All of these real, tricks is for kids. All of these companies came out with a real brightly colored, sugary cereal laden with tons and tons of sugar, high fructose corn syrup, you name it, in addition to tons of artificial dyes. And many of us are familiar with this, but lots of these dyes have been shown in many different studies to cause problems in children, problems with focusing, problems with, concentration, impairment of their mental capacities in some way, shape, or form. In fact, it's interesting that the FDA allowed all of these dyes to sort of just happen without really any good research done first. A lot of the other European nations require a company to be able to prove that their product, if you will, is safe and doesn't cause harm before you can even use it. And here in the U.S., over the years, certain things have gotten out there without ever proving that they're safe. And a lot of these things are such things as artificial colors and dyes and things that get into our foods. And they really have shown to have some not awesome effects on kids. And I'll be honest, as a kid growing up, I have my favorite cereals, and Trix was one of them. The famous Bunny Rabbit Trix is for kids slogan. I mean, I ate that stuff up, and my parents didn't buy it very much, thank goodness. I think it was more of an issue of it wasn't really all that cheap. We usually got the cheaper, less expensive version, the Post Toasties, which was the competitor, of course, of the Kellogg's Corn Flakes. Whatever was the local store brand version, because it was half the price or whatever. But I ate plenty of cold cereal growing up, and of course it didn't do much for me. I was hungry an hour later, of course, from that initial sugar rush, and no satiety factor because there's no protein or fats in there. It's just all kinds of sugar. Well, maybe a tiny bit of protein, but not much. Mostly just sugar and carbs. And, I was like any other kid in the 70s that had all these different options of cold cereal, and we thought that was breakfast. I mean, well, what else did we know, right? It was easy. In the 80s, we shifted to other characters like Mr. T. He had his own cereal. Remember the guy that used to say, "I pity the fool." He probably pitied the fool who didn't eat his cereal, I'm guessing. Other characters like Donkey Kong. We had, of course, the Smurfs that were the icon for the Smurf Berry Crunch. Cabbage Patch Kids, California Raisins, of course, were promoting Raisin Bran, which if it didn't have the raisins with all that dang sugar on top, it probably wouldn't have been a horrible cereal because there's tons of bran in there. But, I mean, you look at the carbohydrates on that thing with all the added sugar. I mean, it's pretty hard to honestly call that health food. Most of the cereals, I think you'd be hard-pressed to call any of them health foods. I think now, at least in the 2020 year and in the 20-teens, we definitely have some healthier options, which is awesome. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But these earlier cereals were largely full of carbs and sugar and things that weren't awesome. They may have been, quote unquote, fortified with some vitamins and minerals. Usually this was with very teeny tiny amounts. And the initial history behind all that is, I had to look this stuff up too because I didn't really believe it. But a lot of the initial cereals were fortified with iron. But guess where they got the iron from? From literally little pieces of iron shavings and things like that. I mean, it's just crazy. Like they actually had that stuff in cereals back in the day. And of course, that's not really being done now, at least to our knowledge, but it's crazy. It's a crazy history. But why is it fortified anyway? Well, probably because they don't have much nutritional value at all. And so they're trying to sort of have some ability to make these claims that they might be healthy. And so they're quote unquote fortified. But usually if you read the label, it's very minimal. And it's certainly not enough to really be helpful. And of course, fortification by an external process is never going to be as healthy for you as if it were with the natural, fruit or vegetables containing these important vitamins and minerals. If you try to just add them to a cereal, it's never going to be as good. So anyway, we had very interesting cereals in the 70s and 80s, mostly sugar laden. In the 90s, we got more of a healthier, what we thought healthier type of cereals. We had things like Nature's Path and Viral Kids line that came about in this time. Kellogg's acquired in the early 2000s the Kashi line, which was definitely more healthy than other options. And people who were becoming more health conscious wanted to have more healthy options. So Kashi kind of took off. And really, it's all been, about the labeling. Now you can look for cereals with lots of the taglines on them saying that they're both fortified, saying that they're non-GMO, saying that they're vegetarian, whatever else they're sort of marketing. You can really look to all of these kind of very popularized, sayings on the cereal boxes even now. And most of them, unfortunately, are still not that healthy. I did a couple of PubMed searches over the last few weeks looking at this whole issue of breakfast in and of itself. Is breakfast really this most important meal of the day that we've been told by Dr. Kellogg and Miss Cooper from way back when, the 1910s, when they really did it just to, selfishly market their Kellogg's company, their cornflakes, and so on? Was there any science? Certainly not back then. And then over the years, there has been science. A lot of it, guess what? A lot of it has been done by these cereal companies themselves, and they usually show some positive evidence that breakfast is the best meal or is a good meal and that these cereals are healthy, which is actually, when you look at all the bigger studies, hasn't really been borne out. And certainly to call cereal in general a health food is pretty hard to do. I think nowadays at least there are some healthy options out there that are better than what I grew up with, which was pretty much just all the sweetened cereals with artificial colors, dyes, and things like that. So there are definitely better options. I literally was able to, just in a simple PubMed search, and that's where I go to get my data. I just don't do a simple Google search because who knows what you'll find. I've talked about that before. You'll really find whatever you want to match your preconceived notions because there's stuff out there for everything. But if you go to a reputable site like PubMed, you look up all the studies out there, there were literally 3,000 studies mentioned about breakfast and whether or not it's healthy, whether or not you should skip it. And the data is across the board in this. And I think it's not to be dogmatic about whether you should eat it or not eat it. It's really about if you choose to eat it, make it something that's healthy. I think that's way more important than whether you eat it or not. This saying, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, that was really just a part of an advertising campaign, I think we can all pretty much say is generally, the more you read, the more you know. We would probably agree that it's not really true. And it's, really not based on good, sound evidence. Certainly it was not when it came about, and there's so much more out there now. Initially, there were those that promoted this, that said that, if you ate breakfast, then you would eat less during the day, and so maybe you would lose weight. And then the converse to that was if you didn't eat breakfast, you can find another study that shows that maybe you might be more hungry and eat more calories later. When they've looked at these bigger studies that combine lots of smaller studies, these are called meta-analyses. They basically take lots and lots of data. They try to distill it down. And at the end of the day, most of them would agree that you would eat less calories throughout the day if you skipped breakfast. That's what the overwhelming data suggests. And I'm not advocating that that's right for everybody. Personally, I found that intermittent fasting has been really helpful for me, for my own lifestyle. I really only like to eat 2 meals a day anyway. I don't really like to be eating 3 big meals, to be honest. I love to eat. I mean, if anybody has gone out to eat with me, I can pretty much eat anybody under the table, other than maybe my now 14-year-old son, who's got some kind of bottomless pit going on in there, and he's sort of at the level where he can probably out-eat me. But I love to eat, and I love to eat rich, natural, whole, just really focus on the WHOLE, the whole foods, because I think that's where the real nutrients lie. That's what we're going to get the most benefit from. And so, you can pretty much find data to back whatever it is you want to believe. I think at the end of the day, if you pull it all together, you look at these meta-analyses, they do show that if you skip breakfast, which is what I do on most days, you tend to eat less calories throughout the day. They've looked at this in all different studies, and what they've, the ones that have shown breakfast eaters to be healthier than non-breakfast eaters, it's usually just what they call an observational study. In other words, it's not really causal. It's not showing the cause and effect. It's when they look at all the details about the different people, those that skipped breakfast, those that ate breakfast. Generally, those that did eat breakfast in these studies had a lot of healthier tendencies in general, those that were skipping breakfast. Mind you, most of these studies were really done before sort of the intermittent fasting became popular. And so most of these had people who skipped breakfast tended to drink more and smoke more and exercise less and all these kind of other factors that showed for these guys that in those particular studies that maybe skipping breakfast was not a good idea. But if you look at the bigger studies, especially the randomized controlled studies, which are kind of the sine qua non of good data, the RCT, which is kind of the ideal, type of study. And then when you combine all these in the form of a meta-analysis, usually they're going to show that if you skip breakfast, the obvious is true, that you'll eat less calories throughout the day. And I actually love breakfast myself. So what I often do, I eat sort of a breakfast for lunch. Let me just give you today's example. I took my kids surfing early this morning. I got out of work. I end my overnight shift at 6 a.m. I come straight home. I scoop the kids out of bed. So we're off paddling out in the water by 7 a.m. or maybe a little before. We're surfing for an hour or two, depending on how long the wind permits us, and we'll stay out, until it blows out, so to speak. And we'll get home around 9 or 10, or if we drive to the other side of the island, 11 or 12. And I'll basically eat my breakfast at 12, at noon, which is kind of the way we used to do it back in the day, before all of this popularity behind promoting breakfast. We usually ate, our ancestors, 2 meals a day. And this is kind of what I do most of the time. And I love breakfast so much that I tend to eat breakfast, but I just eat it at noon. And it usually consists of kind of heavier foods. I eat eggs. I eat 3 or 4 eggs every morning, at least almost every morning. I eat avocados, so healthy fats. And if you want to learn more about fats, listen to my previous podcasts. I've done a couple on fats, things like LDL, things like vegetable oils, and the healthier options that are not processed, like avocado oil, coconut oil, MCT oil. These are sort of the more healthy options. And that's what I use to cook. I poured some olive oil on the pan this morning, cooked up a whole bunch of eggs. I think my wife, she just trips me out because she kind of itemizes how much. We'll literally make 24 eggs in the morning. 2 dozen eggs just for my family. There's 8 of us, so that's 3 eggs apiece. So that's not bad. I usually eat 3 or 4 myself, and then my little girls probably eat 1 or 2. And so between the 8 of us, we literally eat 2 dozen eggs. I mean, that's probably our most expensive here in Hawaii. Eggs is super pricey, as well as avocados. I mentioned that before, $10 for 3 avocados, So it's a little pricey, but it's good. It's natural. It's whole. It has the healthy saturated fat that I've talked about before. That's what I tend to eat. And I love breakfast foods. So I tend to eat breakfast, but I just wait until noon. And this is not to say this is what you should do. I think it really depends on you, and the data will really support you no matter what your option is, whether you choose to eat or skip. I think if you do eat, you should eat a good breakfast full of good foods, not full of empty carbs. And if you skip breakfast, don't do so as a cheat. Like some people, I want to skip it so I can eat a bigger lunch and a bigger dinner. Well, I would propose that eating a big dinner is probably not awesome, especially if you're going to eat it late at night, because then it gets in the way of this whole business I talked about a few podcasts ago about circadian rhythm. And the 2 main factors are food consumption and the timing of it, as well as the timing of our light exposure. And that surely plays into our overall metabolic health and whether or not we have insulin resistance or not. So having a more narrow feeding window, or the intermittent fasting idea, is sort of behind that, as well as, not eating late at night. And I'll admit, I just worked a couple of night shifts in a row where I'm literally up all night. And because I'm on sort of the 2 meal a day schedule, eating sort of a breakfast, lunch at around noon, and then dinner at around 6 or 7, I have about an 8-hour feeding window. And then after that, I don't eat. Even though I'm up straight, the whole night, I don't eat anything. I'm not usually hungry. Because I eat a filling dinner that has, good whole real food. Last night we had grass-fed. I don't know if I'm going to get any hate from this, but we had grass-fed meat, but it's meat. I eat meat. It's all right. I'm an omnivore. I think it's okay to eat meat. So there's saturated fat in there, which I think is just fine. But we had a mixture of both grass-fed beef, as well as they got this thing of grass-fed bison meat that you can get that I just wanted to try. I'd never tried it before, but we had it in tacos last night. It was pretty hearty. I had a bunch of avocados with it. My guacamole homemade. It's pretty awesome. And sour cream, pure whole sour cream with basically 2 ingredients, It passed my 5 ingredient test, and I had a big dinner, and I was up the whole night, and I didn't eat anything. I drank water, I didn't eat a single thing, and to be honest, I wasn't even hungry. And that's a little different than most of my night shift colleagues, where they tend to snack all through the night. And I think the reason I don't really get that is because of the foods I choose to eat, which are whole, real, and also, I take part in some good high-quality nutritional supplements that keep my blood sugar balanced really well. And I just don't crave. I don't get the late-night munchies, so to speak. And so I think at the end of the day, breakfast is really optional, and it's up to you whether you want to include it or not. And if you do choose to eat it, I think that's perfectly well. Just choose to eat things that are good. And really a sort of, protein-rich breakfast is best with things like eggs and then healthy fats like avocados. I mean, my favorite, my wife makes this awesome, and it's super simple. I think we got like 3 ingredients. We have eggs, just cage-free, grass-fed eggs that are organic. We buy them literally by the dozens. Thank goodness we do have a Costco that I don't feel bad about buying my eggs there because they're half the price, and got a lot of kids to feed. So we have this breakfast with eggs that we mix with, a healthy grass-fed ham, the pork that comes there from those that are from good, reliable, sustained ranches. That we have ham, eggs, and cheese. And avocado. So we got 4 ingredients. We throw it in, we mix it up, and it's kind of like an egg scramble. And I love that stuff. I eat my 4 eggs worth easily with all that in there, avocados and ham and cheese, and I just love it. And that's basically breakfast. And so I do a protein-rich breakfast. I'm into that. I think it's helpful. It's eating things that are actually good for you instead of just a bunch of empty carbs that literally, and I found this out myself, and I think you probably have as well, if you eat just a bowl of cereal, an hour later, you're going to want another bowl of cereal, or 2 or 3 or 4 bowls of cereal, because that stuff sticks around very briefly. It spikes your insulin right away because of all that sugar that you've consumed, either in the form of sugar itself, which was added to the cereal, or just all the carbs that's in it. I mean, basically, you look at these common sugar cereals, or even just the non-sugary variations. I mean, almost everything in there is some type of carb, be it through sugar or through the corn or the other grains that are basically carbs when they break down in your body. It's lots of carbs. And so I think steering away from carb loading in the morning is probably a good idea. You won't get that slump. I know when I used to eat cereal, not only was I hungry afterwards, but I also would have kind of this mood slump, where I would have maybe a little hypoglycemia type of thing, where I'd crave more and more food and sugar and things like that. And it was related to that sort of carb loading. So at the end of the day, if you do choose to eat breakfast, there's nothing wrong with that. I personally love breakfast. But I think we just should know the facts, know the history. I mean, the whole idea about it being the most important meal of the day literally was a lobbying body, which was the cereal companies, Kellogg and Post, that were promoting their own products that became literally billion-dollar industries. Super, 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 super interesting stuff. And so they were obviously pushing their own agenda. So, get the data, get the facts, decide for yourself what works best for you, and then just eat high quality, whole, I think that's the most important thing, whole foods, because breakfast can be good for you or it cannot, and it literally depends on what you eat. Probably the second favorite thing that I like to eat for breakfast, I kind of take a day on, a day off. I don't eat eggs every single day, but I certainly eat eggs a lot of days because, number one, they're good, healthy protein and cholesterol that your body needs, and this has been shown through various studies. And if you would like a lot of literature on it too, and you just want to find it in one book, read Dr. Mercola's book, Fat for Fuel. It's awesome. I really agree with that philosophy of good, healthy fats. The other thing I like too is things like Greek yogurt. I kind of alternate between, because that's another protein-laden source. Remember I said it's important to have a good amount of protein in the morning, and it's hard to get that from a breakfast cereal. And there's are a few out there. I actually just ordered online some cereal, and I'll tell you about it once I've eaten it and tried it. And honestly, I don't really eat cereal anymore because I found it's not awesome, at least most of the varieties out there, and it doesn't help me that much. But I've looked around long and hard and wide for healthy versions, and so I did just order a variety pack of a cereal that's got good ingredients. It's got natural sugars, which are basically through monk fruit as their primary sweetener in there, and they have mostly protein through nuts that kind of are baked to seem like flakes and things, so it's not carbohydrate rich, it's actually protein rich. It's got natural sweeteners like monk fruits, not having bunches of sugar, in fact very, very little if any. And so I've ordered a couple of these to try if I find them to be helpful or healthy for me or my family. My kids are going to try them too. I'll shout out to you on a later podcast. But honestly, we go still to Costco, and we very rarely buy cereal anymore. We used to buy cereal like crazy, because that's just what I ate growing up. It's what my wife ate. It was kind of our comfort food. And I'll be honest, we'll buy it once in a while, but it's pretty rare. We just don't find it to be super awesome as far as healthy, as far as satiating. It's just none of those things for the most part. I like granola, but I buy a grain-free granola, and I throw it on top of Greek yogurt, just simple, non-sweetened Greek yogurt. And I throw a bunch of fresh fruit on there, a bunch of organic blueberries, organic raspberries, strawberries. And that's my meal. And I love it. So I can use that as an alternative breakfast or an alternative. I do that often at night. If I feel like I need a little snack or I want a dessert, I often throw that Greek yogurt with some fresh berries and grain-free granola. Oh, it's like heaven. So anyway, not to belabor this, but at the end of the day, it's really up to you whether or not you want to eat breakfast, but there are definitely healthier options than cold cereal, which for the most part is not all that healthy for all the reasons we've talked about already, and there's lots of data behind this, and I think you just got to choose what's right for you, and if you do choose to eat it, it's just fine. Like I mentioned, I love breakfast myself. I just tend to eat it later in the day, and as long as you're eating good, high-quality breakfast foods with protein, healthy fat, it's not going to be an issue for you. It's not going to be a problem. So just like I always like to say, it's not the counting of calories per se. It's not taking a notebook of all the different types of foods and keeping a super long detailed list. Dr. Mercola recommends this. I just think it's too much for most of us. Even me, I just don't do it myself, and I'm not going to ask you, my listeners, to do it. But what I would ask is to just look through your pantry and all the stuff that we've talked about that aren't good for you, which may include a bunch of unhealthy cereal. You might consider just tossing it or giving it, better yet, maybe just give it to the food pantry or whatever, because there's certainly a lot of people that wouldn't mind having it. And I just don't find it to be super healthy for all the reasons mentioned today. And I've really converted into a cereal-free breakfast with the exception of grain-free granola, which I love to have with some Greek yogurt. And I think there are a lot of more healthy options, healthy fats, healthy fruits and vegetables. And I really think that we can do this. We can get healthier. We can do it through natural ways with lots of real, whole food that we can all pronounce. Not a long list of 20 or 30 ingredients in our favorite breakfast cereal, or even, regular yogurt for that matter. Most of it has artificial sweeteners nowadays. You really got to be careful. I go to the pure, protein-rich, plain Greek yogurt. I think it's awesome. My kids eat it as well. We love it. In fact, I accidentally bought one of the wrong types of yogurt the other day. I was at a store I don't normally go to and literally took a spoonful of it, and I couldn't eat it. So it makes a difference. Aloha to you guys. Thanks again for listening. Reach out to me, Modern Medicine Movement Podcast at gmail.com. Love you guys. A big aloha.